Howdy, readers. I'm Jason. This is Chapter and Verse, and it is Friday night, my favorite night of the week. Work week is over, weekend is here. It means reading, it means watching tennis oftentimes. Unfortunately, it also is going to mean cleaning the rain gutters this weekend, and mowing the back lawn, and killing the little baby trees that spring up when seeds fall from the sky and bird poop. But it's June 1st, and so I wanted to do a brief May 2018 wrap-up. So let's just jump right into this. Both feet. So the first thing, of two things that I read this month, was Ali Smith's How to Be Both. As you guys know, I did a buddy read on this book with Jasmine from Jasmine's Reads. Both of us really, really liked it. I think we both gave it 4 stars on Goodreads. So, I mean, you can watch that video for a more kind of in-depth analysis of what I thought of the book. But basically, I mean, in short, I just thought it was a really beautiful, really innovative, insofar as how it was structured, exploration of grief and how we cope with the loss of someone, and the different ways we test ourselves and punish the people around us. One of the things I wanted to mention in my first video on the book that I forgot to mention was how the main character in the modern story, the young girl, George, teenage girl, how she does this thing, right? So her mother's died, and her father is dealing with his grief by just getting soused every single night. I mean, he's just drunk all the time. And anyway, she's got water coming through the ceiling in her bedroom upstairs, and she gets it into her head that she's not going to tell him about it, and I feel almost like she makes that decision to punish him for dealing with his grief in a way that excludes or alienates her. And at some point toward the end of that modern section, of the contemporary section, she kind of lets drop. I mean, consciously, but she kind of lets drop that she's got water coming in the roof to her room. And it's interesting that sort of immediately sobers her dad up, and he races upstairs. I feel like she was kind of punishing him, I suppose, right? I mean, here's this man who's lost his wife, and he, if anything, I mean, he needs to be needed in that time, and for her to make that decision to preclude him from that. And to further alienate him from her, didn't ring cruel. It rang very true. I mean, I could completely see a teenager doing that. But it made me feel quite sad for the character of the father, and especially because he doesn't really get a lot of scenes in the book. But that scene itself, that one scene, I felt like really deepened his character. And it really kind of complicated her motives, I think, for doing what she was doing in her own grieving process. So, anyway, it's a brilliant book. Jasmine and I have kind of kicked around the idea a little bit of doing another buddy read of this book, maybe in a year or 2 years, because we both read the copy where the modern section comes before the Renaissance section, and apparently there are copies out there where the Renaissance section comes before the modern section. And so we're kind of intrigued by the idea of reading it again in the future, flip-flopped, and to see what that will do to the story. I think we're both a little skeptical that version of it would be better than this version was, but who knows? I guess we won't know until we read it. So the second book that I read this month, I read this with my book club, The Eclectic Shade Tree, which I spoke about in a recent video. Finished this last night. This is The Tsar of Love and Techno by Anthony Marra. Now it says right there, it says that it's a collection of short stories. Okay, it has been marketed as a collection of short stories. I do not consider this a collection of short stories, right? So each piece in it, whether you want to call it a story or a chapter, they are so clearly and beautifully linked to each other, right? So we see the same characters crop up in the stories. We see the same painting crop up in the stories. Everything is just kind of beautifully intertwined. And as a result, it feels much more like a novel to me. I mean, if the connections between the stories had been more kind of vague or insinuated, it would be easier for me to look at them as distinct pieces. But he's pretty forthright. He's pretty straightforward about connecting these stories and linking them up. And the fabric that they make is pretty extraordinary. I mean, it takes us through basically, I don't know, 2/3 of the 20th century in what was the Soviet Union and then Russia. Really, the only thing I didn't like about the book is that so the guy who wrote it, right, Anthony Marra, got his MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop, right, like the school for creative writing. He was a Stegner Fellow at Stanford, where he currently teaches, right? He lives in Oakland, California. Okay, here's a picture of the dude, all right? So I don't know how old he is, but he looks like he could be bagging groceries in Mayberry, okay? He looks really quite young, like he's 21, like he just bought his first razor last week. And so as a result of that, right, so his MFA from Iowa notwithstanding, there were passages in the book, and initially it was looking like it was going to be maybe a half dozen through the whole thing. But then the center story, there's this long story, the title story, which is kind of the hinge on which the book turns. There was a lot more of these passages in that middle section. And I'm talking about passages that feel like he's gilding the lily a little bit, okay? You know those passages, right? And they're often from recent MFA graduates, where it's just overdone, okay? Like you feel like if they had gone back, a week later or something, ooh, okay, I should have cut that in half, or I should have found a new way of saying that, because it's just a little bit overwrought. And so there are flourishes like that in the book that I found distracting, and I found a little cloying and a little bit pretentious. So one of those passages is right here on page 250. Two men walk in front of her, two beside. She has no shoes on, and her feet are wooden blocks fixed to her ankles. Raw copper wiring binds her wrists behind her back in rings of pain. She focuses on her wrists, on the copper infinity wound around them, her skin a frozen lake into which a skater carves figure eights. All right, so in the space of 2 sentences, we have 3 different ways that Marra is describing like these bonds or these bands around her wrist and how painful they are, etc., etc. And the first one's pretty straightforward, right? All right, the copper wiring binds her wrist behind her back in rings of pain. Rings of pain is a really bad phrase. It's a really lame phrase. But then it goes on, right, to focus on her wrist, on the copper infinity wound around them. That's a horrible phrase. What does that even mean? Her skin a frozen lake into which a skater carves figure eights. All right, we get it, okay? So there are, I don't know, maybe a dozen and a half passages like that in the book where you feel like, okay, he needs to pare this back some. This is straining, right? It's overly poetic in a way that only a writer like Cormac McCarthy or somebody could get away with, would know how to do it well. So don't try to do that, right? If you're Anthony Marra or some other young writer out there, know your limits. Know what is distracting from your book, and passages like that distract from the book. Otherwise, it's really dour. It's really grim, but it's just really lovely. And I felt like, as a kind of tapestry of life and of existence in 20th century and early 21st century Soviet Union and Russia. I felt like it gave me just a great kind of kaleidoscopic view of that place in that time, and then taken together with other books like the nonfiction Voices from Chernobyl by Svetlana Alexievich, which I read I think last year, might have been the year before. So taken together with this book, and then a film like Werner Herzog's Happy People, A Year in the Taiga, right, which is a documentary about people who are really living out of time. They're living in, if memory serves, in the absolute depths of Siberia, and it's set in the modern day. I mean, this is contemporary, and it's a documentary, and like these people make their own skis. They trap their own food. It's wild to think that these people are living now, right? This is not about people living in the 18th century. It seems like it is, but it's not, right? They're riding around on snowmobiles. But when you look at Happy People and Voices from Chernobyl and the Tsar of Love and Techno, when you look at these works together, right, and the picture that they make of Russia, it's pretty captivating. It certainly makes it feel like a place that one wouldn't want to live. That's for sure. I mean, I'd like to see it someday, but not with the people in power who are in power and who look like they'll probably be in power forever. Just the corruption in that institution, in that government, in that nation, comes across pretty strong in this. So I was really impressed. I would recommend it to anyone, really. You just got to kind of grit your teeth through those more flowery passages. But that's what I read in May. And tonight I'm going to start Moon Tiger by Penelope Lively, which I've never read. Won the Booker Prize, I can't remember what year in the 80s, but is currently a finalist for the Golden Booker Prize, the 50th anniversary Booker Prize. And I may talk more about that book after I finish it, maybe in the wrap-up next month, whatever. But I've got some ideas already about what is happening with that book over the last, say, 5 years, maybe 5 to 10 years. I hope you guys have less yard work to do this weekend than I do. If you have to clean your rain gutters out, I hope you're not afraid of heights like I am. And happy reading, everybody. I will see you again in a couple of days.